know, effective April 19, which was this past Sunday, the Israel government began lifting some of these restrictions due to the coronavirus. Starting Sunday, the work staff started to be increased to 30%, and the infant child care centers were opening, as well as the special education classroom for up to 3 students. And on Monday, finally, Netanyahu and Benny Gantz signed an agreement to form a coalition government together. As per our WITSO centers, all our schools, daycare centers, and youth villages were closed with some exceptions. We have 5 daycare centers that are located in hospitals, and obviously we couldn't close them because somebody had to take care of the children of the healthcare workers. Our 2 shelters for battered women are fully operational, and they are actually full to capacity. We had to start looking for another place for these women who were suffering from domestic violence. The centers for the treatment and prevention of domestic violence are also fully operational, as well as our 24/7 hotline for violent men who get some counseling when they feel that they are exploding and somebody has to stop them from committing a violent act against their wife or their children. Our parents hotline also has been expanded from 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. And as I told you, the schools in the youth villages have been closed, with the exception of 310 students that had to remain in the villages because these students made Aliyah. They emigrated to Israel a few months ago, and they were waiting for the parents to join them, which of course couldn't happen. And we also have some foster family units, which we called in Hebrew mishpachton. All of them are under the supervision of asketical staff, because 6,000 member staff of WITSO had to be furloughed. I would like you to know that in spite of this situation, WITSO has always been a very, very strong movement that has learned to adapt to change. Hence, rest assured that we will survive and thrive, and more with the help of all of you. Thank you. Now, in reference to tonight, yesterday was Yom HaZikaron, the Day of Remembrance. Jews around the world commemorated this day, which is considered one of the most solemn days in Jewish history. Why? Because 6 million Jews were murdered. When I say 6 million, I'm talking about 6 million fathers, mothers, children, babies, grandparents, grandmothers, uncles, aunts. And why they were murdered? Just because they were Jewish. Some people ask, why do we have to remember? We have to remember because the Holocaust has taught us that this is not only about the Jews. During the Holocaust, besides the Jews, many hundreds of thousands of people were killed. People with disabilities, homosexuals, Catholics, Serbs, political dissidents, etc. The Holocaust has taught us that this is something that human beings are able to do to solve other human beings. It's something that is so broad that people need to understand that it's not only about Jews. Why do we have also to remember? Because nowadays, with the increase of anti-Semitism and hate, and anti-Semitism has not only increased to the right, like it was during Nazism, during Hitler's regime, it has also increased to the left, and also it has also increased by a group of anti-Zionists and radical Islamics who propose BDS. So if I have to tell you that something if I have to sum up I would tell you that the Day of Remembrance is not only a day of memory, it's also a day of a wake-up call to responsibility. We are all responsible to educate not only ourselves, but also to educate our leaders so this hate will stop. WITSO has had a tradition for many years to host memories in the living room. This time, due to the coronavirus, we couldn't host it, in our homes. So we decided to do it virtually. That's how we came with the idea of memories in the WeZoom. Tonight, I had the pleasure of introducing to you a dear friend, Laszlo Selly. I met Laszlo 3 years ago when he decided to join us for the first time to the March of the Living. When he came back, he decided to get more and more involved, and now he also volunteers at the Holocaust Memorial in Miami Beach, where you can see him every Friday morning. With that being said, let's give a welcome to Laszlo Selly.
Hello, you hear me? Okay, good evening. Good evening, everybody. My name is Laszlo Selly, and I was born in Budapest, Hungary. But my name was not always Selly. When I was born, my name was Schwartz. My father changed the family name after the Holocaust because anti-Semitism was still running rampant in Hungary, and he felt that as children we'll have a much better chance in life, not advertising our Jewishness. But before I tell you my story, I'm going to ask you a question. Do you believe in miracles? Don't answer me now. Wait until the end of this presentation and then we can talk about it. My very first recollection of my childhood is my mother sitting in our living room and sewing yellow stars on our clothes because the law was that all Jews, regardless of age, have to wear a yellow star on their clothes. So when we went out on the street, everybody could clearly see, there goes a filthy, lousy Jew. We lived on a beautiful tree-lined avenue in Budapest. The Museum of Natural History was right across the street from our apartment building. And we used to go there as little kids, and we loved the place. We loved walking through the big white corridors and see all the stuffed animals, the ancient skeletons, the rocks, the crystals, whatever they had there. One day we were going there, but there was this big sign on the front door, and it said, Jews are not allowed. I have never been in that building since. The apartment building where we lived had a little garden in front, and the garden had a little sandbox where all the little kids used to play. And I played there with my twin brother, because I do have a twin brother. And of course we played with all the other kids in the building. But those kids came to us one by one, and they told us that they cannot play with us any longer because their parents forbid them to play with Jews. So my brother and I, we played alone. Until one day, we were out there playing, and the man looked through the gate and saw us there in the sandbox with our yellow stars. He started screaming, lousy Jews, wait until I get my hands on you, and started rushing us. And both my brother and I, we ran screaming back to our apartment and there was nothing my parents could do about it. And that is when the fear started. When I first realized that there are people out there that wanted to hurt me. That fear has never left me until long after the end of this ordeal. New laws came out all the time. One of them was that Jews cannot own businesses. My father had a little shop. He worked with 3, maybe 4 people. He could no longer own it. So he had to hand over the business to one of his old trusted employees. The man took the business over, and the moment the papers were signed, he fired my father, stating that he will not employ Jews. The Jew employed him for many years and gave him bread to take home to his family, but he would not employ Jews. So there went the family income. New law came out. Jews cannot live wherever they want to. They have to move into the ghetto, or in the case of Budapest, into a designated Jewish house. They simply took an apartment building. They painted a big yellow star on the front gate. That became a designated Jewish house. Jews had to move in there, whether they had an apartment or not. And so we had to go to one of these houses. I remember as we left our apartment, the only thing we could carry, what we could hold in our 2 hands. We were little kids. How much could I carry? I had my pillow and my blanket. My parents couldn't carry much more either. And we moved in to this designated Jewish house. And as we looked back, when we left our apartment, we saw our neighbors rushing in, grabbing whatever they could. We were kind of lucky because my mother had 2 sisters, both married. They both lived in the same apartment, in a little 2-bedroom apartment, each couple 2 bedroom. That building became a designated Jewish house, so we moved in with them. It was not ideal, but at least we were with family. But it didn't last long, because one day the Nazis banged on the door and they shoved in another 3-4 families, old men, mothers with babies, pregnant women, little kids, you name it. Didn't make any difference. They just shoved them into the apartment. Now the place became very crowded. People were sleeping on the floor, head to toe practically. If you had to go to the bathroom at night, you had to step over them. Rest became impossible. Babies crying, old men coughing, people murmuring and talking to each other. And also hygiene. Hygiene became almost impossible with all these people in a tiny apartment. The moment you went into the bathroom, people were already banging at the door. Hurry up, I have to go. Wash yourself, take a bath. That was not possible. Now don't imagine a house or an apartment where you live today that you can go into the bathroom and turn on the faucet and get hot water. We didn't have that. We had to heat water in the kitchen, pour it into the bathtub, get in there and wash yourself with a sponge. With all these people in the apartment, that became impossible. So what happens? We got dirtier by the day. We had lice in our hair. We had roaches. We had mice. The rats were not far behind. And then we had what I think is the worst. We had bed bugs. They're terrible little creatures. They're tiny. You can hardly see them. They come out at night. They crawl all over you. They bite you. And you can't even feel their bites because they're so tiny. But in the morning, when you wake up, you have little bumps all over your skin. And that itches like mad. And try to tell a little kid with his dirty, filthy hands not to scratch. That's impossible. You get sick. You get infections. There's no doctor. There's no medicine. There's no hospital. There's no emergency room. If you live, you live. And if you die, well, there's just one less Jew in the world. Who cares? One day, the Nazis came to the building and they collected all the able-bodied men, my father included, and they took them away. We did not know where. They didn't tell us. Later on, we found out that they took them to the Romanian front and they forced them to dig ditches between the Soviet army and the German army for tank traps. They were housed in a building with 3 walls and no roof. And during the day, they had to dig ditches and be in the crossfire between the 2 armies. And it was winter time, bitterly cold. So one night, my father had a choice: to get killed in the crossfire, to starve to death, to be worked to death, or to freeze to death. He had a chance and he walked away. And I don't know how. He could never tell us, or he never would tell us. But he came back to Budapest. Now just imagine, one lone Jew coming through occupied Romania, coming through Nazi-occupied Hungary without papers, and coming back to us. I don't know how to explain this. Was it divine intervention? Was it pure dumb luck? Or was it a miracle? I do not know. All I know is that he came back to us. Of course, now he could not go out on the streets anymore because he was still a young man, and that would not do very good in Hungary at that time to go out as a young able-bodied man being Jewish. That would be very, very dangerous. And this was the time when the deportation started. But before that, there were new laws. One of them was the Jews cannot go out on the street whenever they want to. They can only go out 1 day a week to do their shopping, if they had some money, which most of us didn't. So what we had to do is barter. My mother had a wedding ring. They had to cut it up to 4 pieces. And with a little piece of gold, they could go out and perhaps buy a little food. But that day, when the Jews could go out, most of the merchants decided not to even open up because they didn't want to deal with Jews. The ones who did put out the worst merchandise that they could not sell to anybody. The rotten onions, the soft potatoes, tomatoes, forget it, there wasn't tomato, you never saw a tomato. And this is what the Jews could buy. And they also raised their prices. I mean, let the Jews pay. And then the deportations started. They herded these people out of the buildings. They had guns, they had whips, they had clubs, they had big snarling dogs. They lined them up on the street and they marched them to the railroad station. They loaded them into cattle cars, and you know the rest. They took them to Auschwitz. My brother and I, we watched this from the window, and we couldn't understand it. We didn't know, why are they hitting these people? Why are they cursing at them? My parents could not explain this to us. They just forbid us to go to the window. But how could they? There were too many people in the apartment and they couldn't really control us. We saw it all. By this time, word has leaked out from the camps, because this was quite late in the Holocaust. Word leaked out, so my parents knew about Dr. Mengele, the angel of death. They knew about his love for twins, which was not the kissy, kissy, huggy, huggy love. What he loved to do is do the most horrendous medical experiments on them. And my parents were very much afraid that if we get deported, my brother and I will fall into the hands of Dr. Mengele. But we had an aunt. And really, she wasn't an aunt. She wasn't a member of the family. She was just a family friend. And she wasn't even Jewish. And what's more, she was a member of the Nazi party. She walked around with the armband of the swastika. If I remember correctly, she had a gun on her hip. And she came to us one day and she told my parents that she will take my brother and me to her place to see if she could save us. We had no choice in the matter. We had to go with her. So I know something about how it feels to be separated from your parents at an early age. We were given a new name, a Hungarian name. Little kids, we had to learn this. We were warned never, ever to tell our real name to anybody. And we had to go with her. She wasn't rich. She had a little tobacco shop, a little hole in the wall, tiny. And she lived behind this shop in a dark, dingy room. There wasn't even a door between the shop and her room, just a curtain. And that is where we went to live. But she had a young woman, a young girl, working for her, so she wouldn't have to stand behind the counter all day long. And this girl kind of smelled something not quite kosher and kept asking us for our name. And we would never tell her, except one day she came to me with a piece of candy. And she told me I can have this piece of candy if I tell her my real name. What did I know? I only knew that I wanted that candy. I wanted it real bad. And I told her. My aunt overheard this from behind the wall, ran out like a mad woman, fired the girl immediately, threw her out of there. And within 5 minutes, we were on our way back to our parents, to the designated Jewish house, to wait for perhaps the deportation. And do you know why? Because it was punishable by death to hide a Jew. If they found you hiding a Jew, there was no lawyer, no trial, no judge, no jury. Just stand up against that wall and they shot you. And of course they shoot the Jew also, whether he was a kid or otherwise. Later on, she told us that the Nazis came and confronted her because the girl reported it. And she looked at them and she laughed and said, brothers, who do you believe? Me, I'm a member of the party, or the stupid girl? I had to fire because of stealing. She was lucky. They believed her and she stayed alive. And so did we, because they would have hunted us down no matter where and killed us and perhaps the whole family. And tell me, was this luck? Was this divine intervention? I don't know. You have to decide. Maybe it was a miracle. I do not know. By this time, Budapest is under siege. The Russians, the Soviets, I should say, coming up from the east. The Allies were already fighting in the west, pressing the Germans between them. The Germans knew that the war was pretty much lost. The deportations stopped, but the killing of the Jews in Budapest did not. By this time, air raids came daily, maybe even more so, 2-3 times a day. Bombs were falling like rain. I remember that I was standing by the window watching the planes. We were not supposed to be there. We were supposed to be in the basement when the air raids came up. But after a while, we didn't go down anymore, because what was the sense? If a bomb hits your building and you're in the basement, you can get killed by the building falling on top of you, if you're lucky. If you're not, you are buried down there alive, and nobody will come to dig you out. It was more preferable to die in the initial explosion, so we didn't bother to go down anymore. And I was watching these planes and I saw these bombs falling down, and I was fascinated by it. But the bomb must have fallen pretty close, because from the air pressure, the window shattered into a zillion pieces and flew right into my face, a zillion pieces of glass. And one piece caught me right here between my eyes. There's still a little mark there. And that was the only piece of glass that caught me. I stood there, blood pouring down my face. I could see the end of that piece of glass moving in front of me. How come that it did put my eye out? Or how come that only one piece of glass got me? I do not know. Was it perhaps another miracle? You have to decide. As I said before, the killing of the Jews didn't stop. Pardon me, because I forgot something, that I have to go back to the designated Jewish house when we came back from our aunt. I forgot to mention that my father somehow got a hold of some papers from a Swedish diplomat called Raoul Wallenberg. And this Raoul Wallenberg decided to try to save as many Jews as he possibly can. And he gave us Swedish citizenships. And he also took us over to a different building that he owned, and wasn't any better than the designated Jewish house, was just as crowded, just as miserable. But at least the building had a little plaque in front saying that this is Swedish diplomatic property, in the hope that the Nazis would respect this. But of course they didn't, because to them it didn't matter whether you were a Hungarian Jew, a Romanian Jew, a Swedish Jew, or any other kind of Jew. You weren't supposed to live. So they came to these buildings And they herded the people out of these buildings, and they lined them up on the street, and they took them down to the river Danube. It's a beautiful, wide river running right through the center of Budapest, and executed them, shot them. The building where we lived at that time, this Swedish supposedly protected building, was very near this place. Mercifully, I could not see this, but I could clearly hear it. I could hear the cries and the screams of the people as they realized what was about to happen. I heard the orders being yelled. I heard the machine gun fire. And then we all sat there and listened to the silence. I knew that they were all dead. And we also knew that sooner or later they will come to us. And then one day they did. They came to our building and they told us that tomorrow morning we all have to be lined up in front. Anybody who stays behind will be shot on the spot. And we knew where we were going and why. And that was the worst night I ever had in my life. The women were all crying, hugging their children. The men were huddled together praying, and we were hoping that morning would never come. But of course it did, because it always does. And very early that morning, we heard rifle butts banging on the front door, and we had to open up the door. And there stood two Soviet soldiers with their submachine guns looking for Germans. The Soviet army took the street that we lived on that night. Had there been one day late, I would not be here today to tell you this story. So do you think this was another miracle? I do not know. You have to decide. Thank you for listening to me. If anybody has any questions, I'm willing to answer anything.
If anybody have a question, please write it on the chat, and so Laszlo can answer it. Please feel free to ask whatever you want. Maybe you are interested in knowing how he got to the United States.
I could tell you the story.
Goldie, can I ask something?
Yes, of course.
What year, after the war, how many more years did you live in Hungary, and when did you arrive to the States?
After the Holocaust, Hungary became a communist country because the Soviets never left. From all the other liberated countries that were liberated by the Allies left, the countries were rebuilt and became democracies. But the Soviets never left Hungary. So Hungary became a communist country. So I now had to endure growing up under communism. And I stayed in Hungary until 1956, when we had the Hungarian student uprising. And during this uprising, the border was very lightly guarded for a few days only. And we were able to walk across the border at night, my brother and I, and escaped into Austria. And from there, we came to America.
Laszlo, some people want to know exactly, you said you were a child, but how old were you? They want to know about your age.
Well, I must have been between 5 and 6 at that time. Because I know that we did not go to school until well after the Holocaust. By that time I was already almost 7 years old, and I missed the first year of school, so I started school a year or so later. In Hungary, we go to school at the age of 6, I believe.
Another question, did your parents come to the United States with you?
No, they did not. They did not come because we made the decision to escape in about a 5-minute time. So they did not have the time. We just saw the opportunity. We jumped out of bed, put our pants on, and left. So my parents stayed in Hungary, and they stayed there until they reached retirement age. By this time, I was in New York. I was working. I did not have my business yet. And once my parents reached retirement age, the communists would allow them to leave, provided they give up their pensions and leave everything they own behind. So they did, and they came and joined me in America.
Okay, another question. They want to know if you came by yourself to the United States, if you came with your brother, and what happened when, how old were you when you came to the United States?
Okay, I came with my twin brother. We came together. We were 17 years old. Neither of us spoke one word of English. My brother, who was a good student, immediately got a scholarship to go to Georgetown University and for an extended English class. So he went there and started learning English. Me, I'm afraid to say that I was not a very good student, and I had to find a job in New York, and I became a messenger. Although I already had 3 years of apprenticeship in professional photography behind me, but it didn't matter because I did not speak one word of English. And life was kind of difficult. For a while, I had an uncle here, my father's brother, who immigrated to America long before the Holocaust, many, many years before, when he was still a young man. And I joined him, but it didn't last too long because we could not see eye to eye. So I moved out and lived on my own. And very slowly I learned English and got better and better jobs until many years later I was able to open my own business and become a commercial photographer.
Okay, do you remember what month did the Russians come to Hungary? And they want to know also if there was a ghetto in Budapest.
Yes, Budapest did have a ghetto, but it was a very small one. And there wasn't that much room in it for all the Jews of Budapest or the surrounding areas. So that's why they had designated Jewish houses. And I do not remember the exact month when the Russians came. I know it was 1945, and I think Hungary got liberated, I think, March or April or something like that. I'm not sure of that. I cannot recall that clearly. I should look it up.
Don't worry. And well, you were just a boy, so how are you supposed to know anyway? So another question, did you ever see or meet other Jewish people who you knew from Hungary?
No, I did not meet anybody whom I knew from Hungary. Mainly because when I came to New York had a Hungarian section, Yorkville. I don't know if you guys know about that, where most of the Hungarian and German immigrants lived. And I tried to stay away from that place as far as I could. So I moved way out in Brooklyn someplace, because I knew that if I will move places where I could use the Hungarian language, then I will never speak English. And I want to learn as quick as possible.
Somebody else wants to know, when did you see your parents again?
I haven't seen my parents for many years after that. Probably another 4 or 5 years before I saw them again, before they were able to come out of Hungary.
And then somebody else is asking, have you been back to Hungary to visit? If so, how was the experience with all those memories?
Well, that's very interesting, because the very first time I went back to Hungary, Hungary was still a communist country. And this is kind of an interesting story, because I went back to Hungary at the urging of my cousin Judy, whom I dearly love, and I believe she's watching this. And as I went back to Hungary, I had very mixed emotions when I crossed the border and I saw the guard towers that I had to escape between them. And I kind of kicked myself and said, you know, what on earth I'm doing in here? How stupid I am to come back here. But it was too late. I went back. And actually, I had a pretty good time. I was already an American citizen, and Hungary by that time declared an amnesty for people who left the country illegally, so they didn't bother me really. And then I went back again many years later. I took my wife back there to show her where I was brought up and where I was born. And we had a very, very nice trip, but by that time, Hungary was a democracy and no longer communist.
Can you tell us about your experience the first time you went on the March of the Living and you visit Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Majdanek?
Well, it was a very gut-wrenching experience, and I remember I had no idea what I was doing there or why I was going. I went because of a friend of mine who, the year before I went, was the photographer on the trip. And he was taking pictures, and we were talking about it, since I'm a professional photographer. And when he came back, he wanted me to show the exhibit that he put up at the Jewish Federation. And I went there and I looked at his pictures, which were absolutely fantastic. And he introduced me to one of the principals of the march, Carly. I don't know if you guys know her. And he told her that I'm a Holocaust survivor. And her eyes kind of opened up and said, well, come to my office and talk to me. And I sat down with her and she said, how would you like to go on the March of the Living? And I knew a little bit about it, but not much. And said, well, you know, I don't know, I have a wife, I can't leave her home. So she said, well, bring her along. And that sealed the deal. I came home and I told Gail, how would you like to go to Poland and Israel? And she said, what? And we packed our bags and we went. And of course, the thing was that I have to tell my story. Now, you have to understand that I have never told my story to anybody, not even my wife, before that. She has not heard my story until we were in, I believe, in Israel, or Poland. We were in Poland when I told my story to the kids, 150 kids, and my wife, who sat there with her mouth open. And after that, she said, I don't know you. Who are you? She had I never said a word about it. I never talked about it. I don't know why. It was just not something that I care to remember or recall. So that's how that happened. And since that, this was supposed to be the third time that I then go on a march. Of course, this year we couldn't do it, which is a shame because one of my grandsons would have come on the march with me, and it didn't happen.
Okay, somebody else wants to know what happened to your aunts, if they stay in Hungary or what happened.
My aunt stayed in Hungary, and after the Holocaust, when the Nazi collaborators were kind of put on trial, we could testify in her behalf, and so she was okay. Nothing happened to her because she really was not a true Nazi.
Somebody else wants to know if your wife is a Holocaust survivor.
No, she's not. She's American born.
Are there still a lot of Jews in Hungary?
Not as many as they used to, but there are some Jews in Hungary, yes. And, you know, if you want to know the truth, anti-Semitism is still pretty much alive in Hungary. And it's being, well, I shouldn't say that it is official, it's not, but it's still there, and it's a shame, it's still there. Like many other countries in Eastern Europe.
Yeah. Somebody wants to know if, hold on, if by sharing your story, if you think that by sharing your story, it has helped you heal.
I would think so. I would think so. I did not tell my story for many years, and I tried to put it behind me and bury it deep inside. But you can't bury something like this. You just cannot. And I think now that I speak about it regularly, I think I look at it differently. I understand that it's a very, very important thing to tell new generations, young kids, what happened, because they are going to be the future leaders. And if they cannot learn from history, then it definitely will be repeated.
Have you forgiven? I'm sorry. Have you forgiven?
Well, I think I have, for the simple reason is that you cannot live with hate and bitterness. It's not healthy. I would say that I have forgiven because the people who committed these crimes are pretty much all dead. And you cannot blame their children, the innocent. And if you don't get rid of hate, then you poison your own life. Nothing good has ever come out of hate. Tell me one good thing that happened ever, anything, anywhere, because of hate. Whatever good ever happened in the world, it happened because of love and understanding, but not hate.
Okay, another question, was your family observant?
No, my family was not observant, and neither am I. I am very much afraid to say that I like my bacon crispy.
How did your kids and grandkids react when they found out your story?
Well, my grandkids really did not know much about my story until quite recently. How they react, I might have to ask them that one day. I do not know.
Okay, somebody saying that we are honored that you chose to tell your story, as there are many teenagers that will benefit from the courage of people like you that survived the Holocaust and are still here to tell your story. Thank you.
Thank you, that's very kind.
And let me see, because some people are writing on my cell as well. I don't know, does anybody have another question? It seems we don't. I would like to tell everybody that we have recorded this session, that we will share it soon. I would like to thank Laszlo so much for your, Laszlo, I love you. Thank you so much for your time. And everybody is thanking you and saying an awesome story. And I just want to remind everybody that we Zoom events are free, but donations are always appreciated. Although we cannot come together physically, let's make miracles, remember the word miracles, continue to happen. Please support the women and children of Huicho because their lives are in your hands. Make a difference. Stay home, take care, be safe, donate. Thank you so much and hope to see you next Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lottie.
Thank
Oh.
you. Thank you. Thank you, Goldie. Thank you, Laszlo.
Thank you, Huicho, Florida, and Goldie.
Bye. Hi, Marcia.
Thank you.
Love you, Lottie Baba.
Danny Baba.
Johnny Baba.
Johnny Baba.
And Johnny.
Hi, Johnny.
Indekete. Everybody. Love you.
We love you.
Bye-bye.
you
Good
too.
night.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Chisi.
Hello.
Chissy. Sharon.
Bye.
Bye. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night and thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you, Laszlo.
You're
Gracias.
very welcome.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Bye, Goldita. Bye, everyone.
Georgie.
Bye, Goldele.
Bye.
Julie.
Hi, Lottie. How are you?
I'm good, Georgie. I'm good. You're looking good.
Yeah, I just want to remind you people that this guy is whatever he said there, I went through it, the same thing.
You should tell your story one day also.
Similar than his story, actually. And I really admire what you just did. And
You should tell your story, definitely.
it makes my heart really think.
Good job.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, Goldie.
Thank you, Laszlo. Bye, Gail.
Bye. I'm out.